Okay. This shiur is structured a little bit differently than previous shiur. As a quick introduction, I asked at the end of last shiur if people prefer to have shiurim. I'll say that Gemara, I'll say that Shulchan Aruch. Some people prefer one way, some people prefer the other way. Happens to be punkt this shiur. If I would structure it, I'll say that Shulchan Aruch. Then you would have to go back and learn the whole Gemara and the Rishonim to understand it, because there's one paragraph in the Beis Yosef which summarizes it. There is one line in the Shach, there's a long Chavas Das and a semi-long Shardei. But that's in this shiur more fitting to be on the Gemara than I'll say that a Shulchan Aruch. But there are shiurim which will be the other way. So, like this, at the end of Daf Samach Amud Beis, the Gemara first goes through, after the Mishnah explained, there's a Isur Neshech, there's a Isur Ribis, and the Gemara brings a Braisa. The Braisa starts with the Pasuk. The Pasuk is Kaspacho Leisitin Lei Beneshech. V'marbis Leisitin Ochlecho. That means it's Neshech, it's Kaspacho, and Kaspacho says Leisitin Lei, the Malva should not give him with Neshech. And memarbis this is achlecha. For echol there's the isur of ribis, two separate isurim, but one is mentioned, one's the other one. The Braisa asks, is there? Because now we know we have ribis in oichel, we have neshech and kesef. Is there neshech in oichel? Because we only mentioned ribis. The Gemara says, yeah, the pasuk le'sashich le'achicha neshech oichel. And the Gemara says, is there ribis in kesef? Because in this pasuk it says, marbis it nachlecha, and the Gemara says, the same pasuk, l'sashich l'achicha, neshech eichel, continues, neshech kesef. Since you don't have to use the word neshech again, because it says neshech eichel already, l'sashich, l'achicha, neshech eichel, neshech kesef, neshech kol davar asher yashech, so the word neshech is repeated needlessly. So that extra neshech of neshech kesef comes to teach us that there is an isur of ribis in kesef. However, that pasuk of lo yisashich le'achicha refers to a loive, because lo yisashich is don't create a situation of neshech by the malva, right? But it's an isur on the loive. So that means this is surim of neshech and ribis and neshech and ribis in kesef and neshech and ribis in eichel. It all applies to the leiva. It doesn't apply to the malva. How do we know that the malva is also over on the isur of neshech when it comes to eichel, and the isur of ribis when it comes to kesef? So Gemara says Gzeira Shava. Since it says neshech in the pasuk of the malva, kasv chasis and neshech, and it says neshech by leiva leisashich lachicha neshech kesef neshech eichel. Therefore, there's no difference between this. There's no difference between by the loiva between neshech kesef and neshech eichel. Same thing. There's no difference by the malva between neshech kesef and neshech eichel. Both of them have the isur of neshech. Both of them have the isur of ribis. The Gemara says all this is good. The Braisa continues all this is good regarding kesef or eichel. What about kol davar? Neshech kol davar. The Gemara says Talmud Loima neshech kol davar. Being that it has an extra of neshech by kol davar also, extra neshech, so therefore it teaches us neshech by that kol davar you also have these two isurim. What exactly is included in this kol davar? Right. So we have a Tosfos. The Tosfos starts by discussing what the Gzeira Shava is. In the middle of the Tosfos asks a question. Since the pasuk leisashich L'achicha neshech kesef neshech eichel neshech kol davar asher yishach. Why does the pasuk have to start with explaining leisashich l'achicha neshech kesef neshech eichel and then say neshech kol davar? Yeah, kol davar includes eitzim v'avonim. It's important to remember. What kol davar includes also things that are not kesef and not eichel. The pasuk could have just says leisashich l'achicha neshech kol davar asher yishach. If kol davar includes even eitzim and avonim, for sure it includes kesef, for sure it includes eichel. And then we would know that kol davar is also included. So why do we need? Then we will know first of all that leisashich would include isur of neshech for kol davar. Isur ribi is because it has the words neshech, the Gzeira Shava from the word Neshach. And the Taisva says, now over here, this pasuk is Kolel Prataklal. Kolel Prataklal teaches us like this. It starts by saying Lo Sashich. That's a klal. Don't do ribbis. Neshach Kesef Neshach Eichel is a prat. Gives you two specific things. Neshach Kol Davar is again a klal. So Kolel Prataklal. Therefore, you have a klal Prataklal. The klal only includes what's similar to the prat. Therefore, since we have starts by when it says Neshach Kol Davar, it has to be the klal. It's a klal of Kol Davar, but only relevant to things that are similar to the prat of Kesef and Eichel. What's similar to Kesef and Eichel? Has to have both ideas. First of all, is Davar metaltel like Eichel, and Gufay Mammon like Kesef. So what's not included? What's something which is not Davar metaltel or Gufay Mammon? So you have Karkois or land. Land is not metaltel. You can't carry it around, even though it's Gufay Kesef. And Pachas Meshava Pruta is metaltel, but it's not. Since it's not Shava Pruta, it doesn't have Gufay Mammon, and therefore these two are excluded from Kol Davar. The Taisus brings a raya for it from a Gemara in Ksubis. The Gemara in Ksubis is talking about a situation. There's a situation of somebody comes to Bezdin, and he's Moitzi Shemra on his wife. He says, I married this woman, she does not have any psulim. And have Eidim that she was Mazana. So like this, if the husband brings Eidim, then the father of the girl is representing the girl, brings Eidim, and then it proves that the first Eidim were Eidim Zaymim. So therefore, the Eidim of the husband gets skilla because the Eidim Zaymim, and the husband gets Malchus for bringing false witnesses. Rabbi Huda right away says, "In chayav yiskoir Eidim, only chayav if he pays the Eidim to come and say a edus which is not true. But if they came for free as good friends, then he doesn't get malchus." Why is that? From Gzeira Shava. What's Gzeira Shava? It says over there regarding the thing of Moitzi Shemra, V'sam la alilas dvarim. He placed on her alilas dvarim. V'sam. In the Ribis, it says Lo Sasimun olav neshech. The Lo Sasimun and Sam is the same shayrish, placing. Some he placed on her alilas dvarim. Lo Sasimu don't place on him neshech. Just like in the Ribis, there has to be an element of money involved. So too, over here, there has to be an element of money involved. That is the Gzeira Shava of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore, if there's no rent, there's no payment for the Eidos Sheker, the husband does not get Malchus. Now, what happens to the Eidim? If they're Eidim Zemimim, they die anyways because they did wrong. They get punished from a different Aveda. But for the husband to get Malchus, there has to be payment. Rabbi Yirmiyah right away asks the question, Scharim bekarka mahu, or Pachas Meshava Pruta. What's the din if he didn't give them money? He promised them, he gave them payment with land. He gave them payment to something which is Pachas Meshava Pruta. That's the Rabbi Yirmiyah asks. Taisva says, you see over here, the fact that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked these two questions means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, this might be a shaila over here. Maybe not. What's the logic of the shaila? What's Rabbi Yirmiyah asking over here? What's Rabbi Yirmiyah's question? Rabbi Yirmiyah's question is, if there would be ribis in karka and in pachas meshava pruta, Yirmiyah wouldn't have any questions. Just like by ribis, it's obvious that the Gzeira Shava is all the way. Okay, then there's no question b'chal. But if there's no ribis, then Yirmiyah has a question. The question is, do we extend the Gzeira Shava to all the details of ribis, or the Gzeira Shava is partial only to the idea that there has to be a payment, but not that all the dinim of ribis, like karkod, that it doesn't apply to karkod, but pachas meshava pruta also apply in Moitzi Shemra. So Taisa says from here you see that by Karkois and Pachas Meshava Pruta there is no ribis. Then Taisa asks a question, but we have an Erchi in the Gemara, which over there the Mishnah says if somebody sells a house in Orei Choymo, he could take it back right away, refund the money, or after 12 months. And the Gemara doesn't say that if you take it back, Mishnah says if you take it back after 12 months, it's also, the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, that's what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah over there in Erchin says, it's like ribis, but it's not really ribis. And Rashi right away explains, why is it like ribis? Because we look at this as a somewhat of a loan. The buyer of the house gave, let's say, $1 million to buy the house. A year later, he gets back his $1 million. And for that year, he lived for free in the house. So he got a benefit off this business deal. He got a free benefit, extra benefit, a year of living in the house rent free. So that is Isur, it's Kimin Ribis. But it's not Mamash Ribis. Why is it not Ribis? Because the way Rashi explains, it's Derech Halva, not Derech Mecher. And that's the Mishnah. The Gemara later brings a Braisa to ask a question on the Mishnah, that the Braisa over there says, in such a case, Arezu Ribis Gemura, total ribis. So the Torah was matters this form of ribis. Right? So seemingly, if it says over here that when I buy a house and I refund the house and there's 100 and I get back all the money without any deductions, then that ribis, then it's ribis gemura. It's mashma that there is ribis in karkos. So therefore, it's a contradiction to what Tosfos just says that there is no ribis in karkos. Tosfos says, no, Erchen is a different story. Why over there? Over there, we're not talking about the ribis that you borrowed karka and gave more karka back, extra karka. It's still, or something else relevant to karka. Over there, we're talking about that the loan was the loan was a loan of money, and you got karka as ribis on it. And therefore, in such a scenario, it's for sure considered ribis minat Torah, and therefore it's asur. Smash from Tosfos, karka bekarka is not a problem. Mammon and get karka as ribis is a problem. Yeah, that is essentially the words of the Tosfos. It's called dover al pisvaria. There's no ribis in karka. What's the reason for it? Maybe it's not derech halva. Maybe there's metaltalin. Whichever way you want to look at it. There's no limit for it. Because I'll call it prato klal. Huh? Also what? That's a shaila. That's the machlekes of shaylim where it falls into.
What is this sort of you give money, you get that tractor, or you get tractor.
So that is what defines a loan. Yeah, we're going to get to it later. One of the points that we're going to discuss is about the difference between a loan which has karka and a loan which doesn't look like a loan which is money. And then karka is ribis, then the loan looks like a loan, something which is yaitze, money which is meant for spending, or something which is just a karka versus karka, which you could look at it as not as a halva, but as a shoyel, not a leiva. Therefore, those dinim do not apply. The first is davar metaltalin. The question is, if you use something, it might be a shaila, something which you return. You got benefit out of it. The question is, well, how do you measure it? Unless it's clear from the beginning that lets you try it on, it's not the same as using and returning. If it's mecher, it's less of a problem. Yeah, mecher is different than by mecher we have more leniency. You could sell something for more than it's worth or for less than it's worth. Okay, what we're going to go through the shiur now is the tzemach tzedeks. We have 3 tzemach tzedeks. Well, actually, there's 4 tzemach tzedeks on this. 3 of them apply to karka. One applies to shava pruta, and another one that applies to both. To the whole discussion of pachas and shava pruta, I'm not going to get into now. I'm just going to focus on karkos. So we're going to go through the words of the tzemach tzedek. Tzemach tzedek starts, the first tzemach tzedek, which is First which is Aleph, it says B'Taisvis. Starts by this. Ayin Rashi, Ksubes, Menvav Amud Aleph, Dibra Maschel, Scharon, Mashma Ktsas, the Svira Leika Taisvis. Just remember over here, this is different than what Tzemach Tzedek is going to write later, but in a different paragraph. But over here he says, Mashma Ktsas, a little bit, that Rashi is like the Tzemach Tzedek. I like the Taisvis, sorry. Rashi explains as follows. Rashi in Dibra Maschel, Scharon, Bekarka, in Ksubes, Menvav Amud Aleph, says, he explains the Shaila of Rabbi Yirmiyah. How it says, according to Rabbi Yehuda says that you have to rent these 8 days, you have to pay this 8 day shekel, and there's Gzeira Shavot Teribis, and without that, and without that the Baal is not like if there's no Schiras Moment, what's the Shaila, what's the din if you rent them, if you pay them with Karka? It says, Kevon the Meribis Gomar, since Rabbi Yehuda learns everything from Ribis, Kesef Oichel Be'ina Davu Metaltalin. You need money or food, which is metaltalin. Clearly says, you need money, food, and metaltalin. Yeah, that's Rashi's words. It means for ribis, you need to be kesef v'yechel. K'dichsiv l'inyan ribis, like it's written in the pasuk for the inyan of ribis, which is similar to what Taisva says originally. Yeah, however, Taisva just, by the way, Taisva ends with the word shema, but both places. Taisva ends with the word Shema. So it's not 100% clear from Taisva that he holds no ribis in karkos. But Rashi doesn't say Shema. He says, Karka yoichel, kesef yoichel, kidichsiv, v'gab ribis, like it's written by ribis. So that's the Shaila of Yirmiyah is, do we say that since it's like ribis, so you need dafka kesef yoichel, which is metal? Or Dilma the moment of the Gomer Gzeira Shava Filim Karkoi. Maybe the whole idea that maybe Rabbi Yehuda makes a half of Gzeira Shava only for the idea that there has to be some form of payment. But if there's no payment, there's not. But it doesn't make a difference what form of payment. That's the question of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Right? So from here it seems that Rashi holds pretty clearly that there's no ribis by Karkois Bichlal. Tzemach Tzedek continues. Also look in Taisvis and Ksubis over there. Taisvis and Ksubis. First, he starts by explaining it seems like the Gzeira Shava Rabbi Yehuda is not a full-fledged Gzeira Shava for everything. Why? Because Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question on Schar and Bekarka. So if there's no Ribis Bekarka, Dafka Dumi the Kesef Oichel, yeah, so then there wouldn't be a Shaila Bechla. Shouldn't be a Shaila. Elamites, there's no full Gzeira Shava over here. And if you say that there is ribis in Karka, there wouldn't be a Shaila. If you say there's ribis in Pachan Shava Pruta, the Gemara over here in Bava Metzia would have had to teach us, bring a pasuk, bring another neshach or something, bring an extra neshach to teach it to us. The Gemara does not bring any such limud. Therefore, there's no extra neshach to teach this to us. Therefore, it's clear that there is no ribis in Karka. Then he brings the Gemara from Erchin, which we already saw before in the Taisvos in Bava Metzia. Explains it a little bit more expanded, and he explains it in Bava Metzia. He says, just explains what the story is over there. He says, in Erchin, you're talking about a story where the buyer lives in the house for the schar hamtanas mois, for the time that the seller, who becomes the loive, is holding his money. He's paying him back the full amount of money, and the schar of hamtanas mois is the time that he lives in the house. But if somebody borrows a field and says that if this field will get destroyed, I'll give you a field and a half, or he gives him 10 bushes of grapes, which are loaded with fruits which haven't ripened yet. And he says, you have to pay me back with 11. Then the Kulei Alma Karka Dami is considered like Karka. And Memela, it says, Shema Kehaigavnu L'Havaribis Bekarka. Seems Shema, there is no ribis in Karka. Maybe there's no ribis in Karka. Yeah, that's the Taisvos. So we have the shit of Rashi, clearly there's no ribis in Karka. Shit of Taisvos, maybe there's no ribis in Karka. The same shit of Taisvos, both in Argemare and in Ksubis. Now Tzemach Tzedek continues. ובהר"ן שם גם כן, משמע גם כן שהתוספות דקדקו כן על פי פירוש רש"י שם. The Ran over there in Ksubis, Dibur Amaschel Hu Shomer La'edim, he writes in the middle, Mikan Lomdu B'Taisvus, Shanois and Karka Beribis, Beribis Milva Ein B'Mishum Ribis Deraisa. Yeah? Is there Ribis Derabonon? The Ran clearly says later, we'll see what the Ran says. But in the beginning, it just says there's no Ribis Deraisa by a loan of Karka for which you receive back Karka. Why is that? Because Neshach Kol Davar is only metaltalin. Can't be more than, there has to be metaltalin. Because the klal prat klal. Can't be avodim, can't be karkois. They're not metaltalin. Now, the Ran says, what are you going to do with the Gemara Nerchin? The Gemara Nerchin says that you have the situation where you lend, where you buy the house and you refund the house and you get a free year of rent off the deal. He says over there it's different. Why? Because over there the koine, that means the buyer, what did he do? He gave a loan of money. Since he gave a loan of money, and he received a benefit for it. So therefore, over there, be'etzem, there is ribis. There's a special limud where the Torah was matter in that scenario. But really, it's ribis. Why? Because there was a loan of money, and the payment for it, you received some other form of benefit of the deal. But if he gave karka beribis milva, if he gave the karka with the loan was karka, not money, ein ribis shel Torah. It's not ribis midiraisa.
He gave karka and got back money?
Gave karka and got back karka. If he gave karka and gave back money, that's the Geduli Truma, which we'll get to later on. The Truma and something from the Tzemach Tzedek also. Yeah. So now he continues and he says, the Ran finishes by saying that if it's less than the same svara of the Tosfos, if there will be ribis and pachas mishava pruta, there will be a pasuk for it. The Gemara did not bring any. Gemara here about Metzia did not bring any pasuk for pachas mishava pruta. Therefore, there is no ribis deraisa, and that it says. But it concludes mihu vadai miderabonon afilu bekarka afilu pachas mishava pruta misar. Midrabanon, even if there's even in karka, even in pachas mishava pruta, there's still an issur of ribis. Why? The legora miribis dvarim can't be worse than ribis dvarim. Ribis dvarim, when there's something, an extra ribis, which comes not as a financial benefit, but as a different form of benefit, the ribis dvarim. And so even then we see ribis dvarim is no financial benefit whatsoever. And if that is also for sure, ribis karka bekarka, pachas mishava pruta, for sure should be also midrabanan.
Ribis dvarim is in the payment, right?
By the payment.
The karka and pachas mishava pruta is in the type of loan.
Good. So for that you have the Sharadeya takes apart this whole svara. It says you can't compare Sharadeya in the beginning of Kuf Samachal. If you could look at it, I didn't mention it it's not in those papers. The Sharadeya in the beginning of Kuf Samachal has exactly those problems. There's two problems with this. It says you cannot compare the svara. You can't compare ribis dvarim to this. It's not shaykh to compare them. It's obviously that there's no issur in this scenario. The way the Sharadeya understands it, you look in the Sharadeya and it's in the Divrei Tzvi. You'll see the Sharadeya. You'll see he goes through it relatively at length. He brings in the Rivosh over there. The way the Sharadeya over there defines it is he makes the Ran and the Rivosh into machlekas where the ribis dvarim is the deraisa derabanan. And based on that question, whether ribis dvarim is deraisa derabanan, he also says why in this scenario the Ran would compare it to ribis dvarim. But according to the Rivosh, he says it makes more sense that you cannot compare this to ribis dvarim, and therefore the Sharadeya Bechal goes to Mahalach that it's mutter even with the Rabban.
What about a factor for ribis karka?
Huh?
A factor for karka. carpet.
What do you mean avak ribis?
Whatever, like, give us dvarim for carpet.
So he says there's no. That's what the Ran says. The Ran says compared to ribis dvarim. Huh? Ribis dvarim in the karka. If there's no mechatchil and there's nothing in the end either.
Okay.
Ribis dvarim, according to that svara, ribis dvarim goes based on the attachment to the loan. If the loan was a loan of mammon, then you have ribis dvarim. But if the loan is a loan of karka, doesn't apply. The whole you can't compare it to ribis dvarim. For sure, there's no ribis dvarim if you can't compare it to ribis dvarim. Right, I know. But I'm saying is if it doesn't fall into the category of alval bichlal, then there's no shaila of ribis dvarim. Ribis dvarim could only come in addition to regular ribis. Tzemach tzedek. What do you mean? What the way he understands the Gidul Truma?
Yeah.
We'll get to that later. Yeah, Tzemach tzedek is different. Tzemach tzedek does seems to be machmer more than the. Could be if you consider it a ribis, and it becomes a ribis dvarim also. Yeah. Now the Tzemach tzedek continues. B'shita mekubetzes sham b'shem haritva, svira lei b'pshitus kesvaras hataisus. Shita mekubetzes in ksubis brings the ritva, and from the ritva it's mashma b'pshitus like the taisus. What is the ritva in Maseches Kedushin? I mean in Maseches Ksubis. It's a mistake in the paper. Yeah, it's supposed to be Ksubis. Says he in Dibra Maschil Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah says it brings very similar to the Ran, except for the last sentence. The last sentence, he says, Miu ribis derabanan yeshafilu bekarka, upachas mishav pruta. There is ribis derabanan. He doesn't say because it's similar to ribis dvarim. He says, derabanan bechol mili gazer. Because Chachamim made a gzera on any form of financial benefit or any benefit that comes as a result of a loan. Therefore, since essentially this is a loan, therefore, it's asur midirabanan. Nothing to do with comparing it to ribis dvarim. Right? Now, just by the way, let's point out to you that Tosfos by us and Tosfos in Ksubis, you can't bring a proof. First of all, Tosfos by us and Ksubis is Shema, says maybe there's no ribis karkois. They do not. Tosfos does not mention whether there's an isur derabanan, even though there's no isur deraisa. Tosfos says there's no ribis by karkois. Does it mean only deraisa? Or also the Rabbanan it's mutter, it's not so clear. Yeah, and Bechlal, you can't compare Shava Pruta to Ribis Karkois, because Shava Pruta, ultimately, there's an element of money over there. And which is interestingly why in Shulchan Aruch you could say that in the Tur only mentions, when he brings the Rameh, who's Machmir, only brings for Shava Pruta. And the Alter Rebbe in Sif Aleph, the opening Sif of Hilchas Ribis, says the same thing. He says the Isur of Ribis applies the whole Dover like Eitzim V'Avonim, brings the example of Eitzim V'Avonim like the Tosfos. Does not mention Karkois at all. He says in the end, but there is an issue of Ribis in Pachas Mishava Pruta, and does not mention Karkois. There is a difference in Pruta and Karkois. What?
Why would Tosfos not be clear that it's us and the Rabbanan?
What?
Why would Tosfos by us is not clear that it's us and the Rabbanan?
Not us, not Ksubas.
What? After the Sholom not Torah, why would that?
You could, right, after the Sholom in Torah, it doesn't say it's us and the Rabbanan. You could, you're saying, for Tosfos you might be able to medayik, says after Sholom in Torah, but then he says later, Shema and Ribis Mekarkois. Could be, yeah, you could be. You might be medayik one way or the other. It's not so clear. You could be medayik, but from the Tosfos and Ksubas, one of the Tosfos for sure you can't be medayik. It doesn't mention the words minatayik. One doesn't, one does. Yeah. And comparing it to Ribis Dvarim, I mentioned what the Sha'adeya says, that there is no, you can't compare it to Ribis Dvarim. Yeah, why? Because Ribis Dvarim, and there's another, the Chal Svare, is Ribis Dvarim ultimately, he says, where does Ribis Dvarim apply? Ribis Dvarim applies when there's Alvah that started with money. Over here, the Alvah started with Karka. You don't have Ribis Mammon. So the only one who would say, who makes sense to say that it's also Midirabanan is a shit of the Ritva, which basically paints a broad brush, says the Chachamim were geyser in every single way, shape, or form that you gain any benefit out of giving somebody something and getting it back at a later date for the same value. If you gain anything additional to it, it is asur midrabanan. So then you give karka, you get more karka. You give karka, you get a nice word. You give money, you get a nice word. You give karka, you get back money. You give money, you get back karka. Whichever way you're going to look at it, always going to be asur. Midrabanan, maybe deraisa. But in cases where it's not midiraisa, it's for sure midrabanan. It seems like the Ritva is very machmir on it.
What would be the sort of between karka and pachas pruta?
Pachas Mishava Pruta, ultimately there is an element of money over here. Karka is no money. Karka is no money. So let me say, if you want to,
straight pruta, it's at the call because it's in the moment.
Because it's in your moment, but because metaltalin, but it doesn't have moment.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if everything you're going to look at is because Chachamim were geyser because of similarities, and similarities, Pachas Mishava Pruta also.
It's more similar to
it's more similar to a loan. And I think in the Drush Chiddush of Akiva Eger, which I also printed for you in the back, and you can be also medayik a little bit from the Alter Rebbe along those lines, that when in a scenario where the loan is Pachas Mishava Pruta, but when you combine it together with the ribis, it becomes a pruta. Is there a shaila of ribis over there or not? I think it mentions it, by the way. But I'm not I'm not going so much into Shava Pruta. I'm more focusing on Karkais. Pachas Mishava Pruta seems to be pretty clear that it's asur kapanim midrabanan.
Is Pachas Mishava Pruta alone is Pachas Mishava Pruta, or what that the ribis is Pachas Mishava Pruta?
That's part of the question. That means that the ribis is Pachas Mishava Pruta.
The loan could be way bigger.
The loan is much bigger. What I'm saying is over here talking about if you have a loan that's Pachas Mishava Pruta, and with the ribis Pachas Mishava Pruta together it becomes a pruta, becomes nothing worth it. Is there isser over here or not? Yeah. Now, just by the way, the Tzemach Tzedek brings. He says from the Shita Mekubetzes, the words of the Ritva in Ksubis. He says, "Svirale bepshitas kesvaras hateisus." This is a shtickle of a problematic statement because we have a Ritva on our Gemara where the Ritva seems to hold differently. The Ritva seems to contradict himself. The Ritva in our Gemara says, he brings the words of the Taisvis. He says the Klal Prat. The Klal Taisvis says that excludes Karkos and Pachas Mishava Pruta. He brings the raya of Taisvis from Ksubis about the raya that we had from Ksubis about the Eideh Sheker, and then the Ritva continues. Rabbeinu chaylik bozeh b'shem Rabbi. Rabbeinu, I think it could be the Rashba, I'm not sure. Is chaylik b'shem Rabbi in the name of his Rebbes. What's the problem of the Rav of the Ritva's teacher? If this was so partial that there is no Ribis Bakakas and there is no Ribis Pachas Mishava Pruta, and the Gemara should have clearly written it, because the Gemara was not shy to write it in the previous Perek. Perek is in Perek Azav. You have over there one of the statements is Dvarim Sheinu Mekarkos Avodim Mushtaris. I mean, some things the Gemara says there are certain things, but it doesn't apply to Karkos, doesn't apply to Avodim, doesn't apply to Shtaris. Over here also, the Gemara should have been clear that the Ribis doesn't apply to Karkos, Avodim, Shtaris, whatever else it doesn't apply to. It obviously applies to Shtaris, but the question is, does it apply to Karkos? The Gemara does not mention a single word about it. So he says, it's clearly that this does not apply. You can't say like Taisvus. So therefore, what was Rabbi Yirmiyah's question? He flips Rabbi Yirmiyah's question exactly opposite of Taisvus. Rabbi Yirmiyah's question was, do you have to do, when you hire Eidim, do the Eidim have to be Kistam Schirus, which is usually in Metaltalin? Or do they have to be like ribis, which is also includes karkois and metaltal, karkois and shpachim shavapruta? Exactly flipped over the question of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Instead of saying what his svara was, he says, instead of saying that it's like Tosfos says, that if it's like ribis, then it doesn't apply to karkois. And if it's not like ribis, it does apply to karkois. The reason is punkt verkehrt. He says, if it's like ribis, then for sure karkois and pachim shavapruta, he's like it. If it's not like ribis, and it's only like stam schirus, then he's not going to be like it. That's what the Ritva by us says.
Schirus is not by those things.
Stam schirus is not by those things. Stam schirus, when you hire somebody to do work for you, you pay him with something, which is you pay him with money. You pay him with a sack of potatoes. You do something. You don't just give him unless the work is worth a lot of money. But you don't walk over to somebody and say, you're going to work for me for 2 hours. You're going to get 4 inches of land. You're going to work for me for 12 hours. You're going to get 8 inches of land. You're working for a year. You get a half a bay. You get 2 feet. Huh?
It's not a lot of regulations about what you're allowed to pay.
No, but stam schirus, and usually when you hire somebody, you pay him with something which he could walk home with. You don't pay him with a few inches of land, and the more he works, the more land he gets. The Ritva in our Gemara doesn't say if it's deraisa, if it's derabanan. Yeah, I think you could maybe you could say that the Ritva still holds even by us that it's that midiraisa it's still muter, but midirabanan it's aser, because the words that he says b'chol davar and b'chol mili, that really it's that maybe he understood Tosfos to mean that Tosfos said it's muter completely, and his Rabbi held that it's not muter completely, it's only muter partially. It's still aser practically, it's aser because aser midirabanan. It's not so clear. Still, the pile we do have a contradiction with the Ritva, and could be that Ritva was not available to the ones who quoted the Ritva. Yeah. Tzemach continues. After he brings the Ran and the Ritva, he says, "V'zehu she'acharav nimshach talmidei animuki Yosef kan." Following the svara of the Ran, that's why the Nimuki Yosef was a Talmud of the Ran over here in Bava Metzia follows the svara. Because of Gam can kill Shana, was the Loshana Alam Pshita who the Milsa the Ribis Bekarkoleka. Yeah, the Nimuki Yosef by us. Dibur Amaschel Menayin Lerabba is called over. Starts by saying Ribis applies to anything which is metaltal, Ke'ein, Kesef, Oichel, but by Karka there is no Ribis. Says straight up it's mutter. He says, doesn't use the words mutter midaraisa, doesn't use the words midarabanan, he uses the word mutter. Mutter means permitted. Permitted means even midarabanan. What example does he bring? If you lend somebody 5 trees, 5 grapevines, which are loaded, and then you get back 6 grapevines, and that is completely mutter. He brings the raya from Masechus Ksubis, and he uses the words Alma Pshita Lehu Milsa Deribis Bekarka Leko. He says it seems clear from Gemara and Ksubis, they held that there is no ribis bekarkos at all. He concludes by bringing the klal of Prat, the klal of Tosfos. Yeah, that's in the Nimuki Yosef. The Nimuki Yosef was not mentioned as the Rabbanon like the Ran. Was not mentioned that it's also the Rabbanon like the Ritva, and does not mention it in the Lashon of Shema like Tosfos. He's completely matter. And it continues, Rosh kan. The first section of the Rosh on this Perek, Ois Aleph, he brings a whole list of summarizes the first page of Gemara, and in between, I feel like about 15 lines or 12 lines into the Rosh, he says, even though we have a policy to teach us kol dover, anything that ribis applies to anything, if you lend karka for the purpose of receiving more karka, there is no ribis, and he brings it the raya from Ksubis, like Tosfos did, and the Shaila of Rabbi Yirmiyah, And he explains, if there would be ribis in karka, Rabbi Yirmiyah would have no question. But if there is no ribis in karka, that's when Rabbi Yirmiyah's question kicks in. And the shaila of Rabbi Yirmiyah was, do we apply all the limitations of ribis to Motzi Shemra also or not? Then the Rosh asked the question, so Taka, how do we know that there's no karka, no ribis in karka? And he brings the same call protocol like Tosfos. And then he explains what the difference between karka and mammon is. Somebody asked over here before, I think. Question he says, Lo shayach ribis ela b'alvo. Ribis is only relevant by something which is a loan. When the loan only applies something which is given for the purpose of spending or using, and pay back with something different. You borrow $1,000, you're not giving back the same bills. You obviously borrow it to spend it. You're not borrowing it to put it in your closet. Some people might want to do it to show off, but that's not usually the case of alvo. You know what I'm saying? But aval b'she'ela, when it's a shoyel, in English you don't really have two words for it. It's going to end up borrowing and borrowing, but it's not. So, halva is a financial transaction. Someone borrows money. Shoyel is somebody who borrows an animal or something like that. Lo shayach ribis elo schirus mikri. Therefore, in such a scenario, karka, it's not loitzo nitno, and you give something else back. When you borrow land, you're giving back the same land and you're not spending the land. So therefore, it does not apply the same rules as alva. That's the difference between alva. The ribis only applies to something which is alva. That's the logic behind it.
So what's the definition of alva? Anything that you're giving a different item in return?
Any item which you give, which the idea of that item is usually to be spent, and when you return, you give back something similar, but not the same exact object that you got.
So like in that payments, you could have this nice potatoes.
Yeah, because when you're borrowing a sack of potatoes, you're not giving back the same sack of potatoes. You're buying another sack, another 50 pounds of potatoes.
So that's the quality of different.
That's how the Rosh understands. Now, could be somebody's going to borrow a bottle of wine because he's making a party, and like I said, this different scenario. There is sometimes a person who wants to have a nice stocked bar behind him for pictures. He's going to borrow nice bottles of wine, which he's not going to open. And if he's going to give more, usually when you borrow a bottle of wine, it's made for drinking. You give back a similar, you buy a new bottle. You need a specific bottle of wine, specific brand, and you're going to pay back with the same bottle from the same brand. Same year, same vintage, everything. But that's something which is usually, it's not like karka, which is only borrowed for looks. Some things are borrowed for looks.
Yeah, so that would be different or not?
Maybe not, according to the Rosh, maybe not. Borrow a painting, lav dafka. If you borrow a painting and you're going to give him back, a painting with a bigger frame, maybe, or whatever it is, maybe not. According to the Rosh.
Huh? What is it renting and borrow?
Renting you pay for.
Okay, so he's paying this.
No. Renting is the That could be. That's schirus. That's renting. That's what it says.
Why not it? Why not it?
Because you're giving back the same object, and you're paying for the usage.
Everybody has to read to that. Can't be just the Rosh. Everybody has to read to that. Renting.
Exactly. But what falls into which category? What falls into which category? By me renting a tree and giving back more trees, does that count as, is that something we look at it as attached to the karka? We're talking about obviously trees that are loaded with fruits that are not ready yet. That's why they're connected to the karka. If the fruits are loaded, it's a different thing. Fruits don't need the tree anymore. They're not part of the karka anymore. By the way, separate thing. Then the Tzemach Tzedek continues. Ve'ayin riyaz b'shilti hagiboyrim dibra maschel zira teira sosam hadvorim mikol mokim loy hiski rak metaltelim. The riyaz and shilti hagiboyrim in daf samach gimel amud beis on daf samach gimel amud beis. Shilta Geborim, you all know, is on the Rif, the side of the Rif, same place where they ran the Mukhi Yosef, depending on which Masechta. He over there, the Shilta Geborim quotes the Riyaz, and he says, he brings all the Surim of Ribis, and he explains Neshech Kol Davar. And what examples does the Riyaz bring for Neshech Kol Davar? He brings Meya Kelim b'Meya V'Esrim, or Meya Konim Shel Beged b'Meya V'Esrim. Two examples of Metaltalin. Does not mention Karka. Does not mention Avodim. So Tzemach Tzedek said, it seems from him that it's mashma from him that he also holds there's no ribis by Karkois. Huh?
Just from the examples he gave, we should be matched.
From the fact he does not mention it. He brings you specific examples. The Riyaz. He does not mention it as a Shaila B'chlal. The Riyaz was after the Gemara, and he should have thought about it. He does not mention it at all. And specifically when he says Kol Davar, he brings examples which are movable. Taisus brings examples of Eitzim Vavanim. The Riyaz brings, but Taisus we know holds no ribis v'rakos. The Riyaz brings examples of clothing and of kalim. They're also movable. That's Kol Davar. Yeah, and then the Tzemach Tzedek brings the Beis Yosef, says the Beis Yosef, Reish Simon Kuf Samachalaf, Hevi B'Shem Rabbi Yerucham, Shekosav, Ala Sharash, B'Chelik Al Teisvis, V'Soiver, the Af, Bekarka, Yesh B'Ribis. The Teisvis, there's a Beis Yosef in the beginning of Simon Kuf Samachalaf, the Ramaz Chalufil Shari, where the Beis Yosef brings the Teisvis, then he brings Rabbi Yerucham that says that the Rashba is Chelik on Teisvis, it says also. The problem is, we have the same problem that we have with the Ritva. The Rashba himself doesn't say that. Now, when you look at the Rashba in our Masechta, now I didn't print the Rashbas in the booklets because you have it in your Sefer. But the Rashba, the Ritva, all the ones in our Masechta. But the Rashba over here in our Masechta, first he starts by explaining like the Ran. Right, they all learned in the same place. The Ran, the Ritva, the Rashba, all just a generation or two apart. One is younger than the other. But they all came from the same, we'll call them from the same yeshivas, from the same yeshiva system. First he starts like the Ran. He says, what does ribis include? Only Kol Davar HaMetaltel, Shukein Kesef V'Eichel. But Karka doesn't have any ribis. Even if you give 5 grapevines for the received 10, he brings the Raya from Maseches Ksubas, the same Raya that the Taisus brings. And he says the same words as the Ran. Alma Pshita Lahu Deribis Le'Shayich Bekarka. He continues like the Ran. Maybe we learn it from Klal Prat to Klal. And then he says, the Rashba says, maybe we could learn it differently. Yeah, maybe we could learn it differently. The Ksubas is not really the same as Ribis. The case of Moitzi Shem is not compared fully to Ribis. They only wanted to learn the concept. When it says Simo, the Gzeira Shava, is only for the concept that there has to be a payment for lying. It doesn't have to be, they don't compare it to Ribis that what forms of payment have to be. Just that the idea of payment has to exist there. So therefore, but he says maybe that's one way of looking. But then he asks a question. He says, if that's the svara, then Rabbi Yirmiyah should have asked the question differently. Instead of Rabbi Yirmiyah saying Scharim bekarka, Scharim pokas shavu pruta mahu, Rabbi Yirmiyah should have asked the question Scharim bechol davar chutz mikasef mahu. If the whole sima is Gzeira Shava, just you have to hire them, then Rabbi Yirmiyah's question should have been a global question. If you pay them anything that's not money, what's the deal? But it's not what Rabbi Yirmiyah is asking. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question, Dafka karka is dafka shavu pruta, pachim shavu pruta. So therefore, the Rashba concludes, Varishin nira ikar. The first explanation, which is the explanation of the Ran, is the right one. Yeah, the Rashba doesn't tell us if it's the Raisa de Rabbanon. Don't say like the Taisus, it might be a Shema. Don't say like Rashi, it's for sure there's no ribis in Karkais. Yeah, but Bepoil, Rabbi Yerucham understands the Rashba that it's also. How did Rabbi Yerucham understand the Rashba that it's also? I don't know. unless you want to say that Rashba also is mechalik between the Rais and the Rabbanon. Maybe the Rashba made Rabbi Yerucham only says it's also with the Rabbanon. Doesn't say that clearly. Maybe the Rabbi Yerucham also understood that when the Rashba says that it's also, it's only also with the Rabbanon, but not with the Rais. Yeah, but that chiluk doesn't work according to the Gedulei Truma that creates it into. We're going to see later that the Gedulei Truma creates it into self of the Rais according to the Rashba. But from the Rashba's words himself, it seems like he holds like the Ran. It does not hold that it's also. The Beis Yosef says B'Shem Rabbi Yerucham, the B'Shem the Rashba that it's also. The Beis Yosef paskin seems to paskin like that. Most of the Achrayim that came afterwards, who probably did not see the Rashba in its original form, also all seem to be machmir based on this Rabbi Yerucham. So the answer to this, I don't know, but that's what the Rabbi Yerucham says. V'ayin gedulei truma. That's Machzeda continues. V'ayin gedulei truma tchilas shin memvav, tchilas shar memvav. Sorry, the gedulei truma in the beginning of shar memvav. The gedulei truma is a pirush in the sefer Trumas. Digdik shemistim as bal Trumas yishleim gam ken the polygal teisves. The sefer Trumas writes, he gives an introduction to Hilchas Ribis. And the end of his introduction to Hilchas Ribis, he says, "Minayin l'Rabbis kol davar Talmud Leimer neshach kol davar asher yishach." He says kol davar does not specify what kol davar includes. A blanket statement of kol davar. There's a long gedulei truma over there. Starts to maschil minayin, goes through the full column of the gedulei truma. Then he goes into pachas and shavapruta. What I'm saying is, the Gedulei Truma first starts by bringing the Taisvis. Taisvis has a kol, a prata klau. With the Tribis has to be double metat of a gufei moment, but of course Pachas Pruta is not. He brings two strong questions on Taisvis, and then he concludes, because these questions on Taisvis are so strong, Shema mishum hanetayim lehevi rabbeinu din zeh deheter karka. Could be that's why, because Taisvis Shitta is hard to understand. That's why the Bala Trumas did not mention Bechlal this heter of Karka, that there's no ribis by Karkas. The Ulai Soiver Keharashba, Shehevi Harav, Beis Yosef Simen Kuf Samachal, B'Shem Rabbi Yerucham, Shechoylek al Taisis Varosh, V'Sever Da'af B'Karka Yesh Ribis. Maybe he holds like the Rashba, which Rabbi Yerucham brought, which is quoted in the Beis Yosef, that he argues on the Taisis and the Rosh, and he holds that there is ribis in Karka. Yeah. Again, we don't know yet what does the Rashba hold, if it's the Rais or the Rabbanon or Bechlal Mutter. Yeah? It seems that when Yerucham understood that it's awesome. Then he says, and he comes to the question. He comes now with Swiss, the next Dibra Maschel of the Gedulei Truma. According to Taisvis, we have a question. What's the question? The question is as follows. We know from Taisvis that when I borrow karka for the purpose of receiving karka back, there's no issue, even if I get more karka. If I'm borrowing money and I'm receiving money back and karka, then there is issue. What happens the other way around? If I lent karka, and when I got back the karka, I got back a financial bonus with it, is that asur mitzad ribis or not? I think that was asked before by somebody. Yeah. Do we say that being that the loan was not with money, so there is no isur? So that's the mashmos of the Ran. And you could also understand that from the Rosh. Or maybe, and therefore, there's no isur. Or do we say no? Taisvis gives us a limited heter. Karka te karka is mutter, but if there's any money involved in the beginning or in the end, it's asur. And he says that l'chayra, every single person who quoted the Taisvis or followed the shitta of Taisvis, they all brought examples of karka versus karka. 5 kfanim, 5 kfanim b'sheish, 5 kfanim b'eser. Whatever examples they brought were all examples of giving karka and getting back more karka. So nobody thought of the idea, maybe say I'm giving you Chomish Kfanim and I'm getting back Chomish Kfanim and $100. Nobody said that. So it's obvious that nobody thought of that this is included in the heter. Obviously, it seems that everybody held that there is such a heter. Before we get to what the heter, he bechal doesn't hold of the heter of karka. He says Negidul Truma is mashma, the Sefer Truma is mashma, bechal doesn't hold of it. He says even according to Taisvus, what's the din over here? Such a scenario. So he says, first of all, Taisvus himself leaves it in the suffix. Doesn't tell you clearly mutter. Uses the word shema. Both in Ksubis and in Bava Metzia uses the word shema towards the end. So you can't eliminate the Vadai Isur of the Rashba, based on Rabbi Yerucham, against the shema of Taisvus. And being that it's a suffix deraisa, by the way, that's how he understands it. It means he understands that the Rashba, the Rabbi Yerucham says Asur, that he understood the Rashba to make Asur deraisa. Yeah. He says, and even on the Mukhi Yosef and the Rosh Matir, at the end of the day, there's a machlekes, and all the achreinim were after the Taisvus were all machmir. Anybody came after the Taisvus, all machmir. They all followed the Beis Yosef and the Beis Yosef in the name of the Rabbi Yerucham and the Rashba. So therefore, l'chumra naktinan, we have to be machmir. And what is an afkamina? When you have a loan of karka bekarka. Yeah? And you have a loan of karka bekarka, and then the lender gave a certain 5 kfanim to get back 6. The loive gave back 6. Then the loive went and was toifus one of the 6. It's rebit. You're not allowed to take the 6th one from me. Go and toifus it back. Yeah? Or toifus something else instead. So then, ein mitzin miyadai. The dayanim can't take the 6 or the value of the ribbis out of the loive's hands when he grabbed it back. Why? He could say kimli. Kimli, like the people that hold that it's also midiraisa. So if it's also midiraisa, not only am I allowed to grab it from you, I can actually go to Bezdin and force it out of your hands. So I just saved you the hassle of going to Bezdin and took it myself. So for sure, kimli like the ones that I say. Even if I hold the Rabbanon, by the Rabbanon, they might see miyadei. Yeah, by tfisa, if it's the din of tfisa, if you grab something with the Rabbanon, it's asur. Yeah, because it was asur for him to take it with the Rabbanon. It's also lemitzin miyadei. Yeah, suffix derabbanon. However, if it's a suffix derabbanon, not a suffix deraisa, kimli goes the other way also. If you didn't take it out, if you weren't taifus from the malva in karka bekarka, you're going to go to Bezdin. Bezdin's not going to be able to get it out of his hands. That means the malva gave 5 for the purpose of getting back 6. The loive comes back and says, I'm only paying you 5. And the malva went and took a 6th one. Or he got a 6th one. He paid him a 6th one. Now also, ein mitzin miyadei. If the malva grabbed this ribis karka, also ein mitzin miyadei. Why? Because it's the rabbanon, ein mitzin miyadei. He could say kimli is b'chlal not aser. But even if he says kimli that is the rabbanon aser, it's still ein mitzin miyadei. Yeah. Why? Because ultimately,
only the loive one that grabbed it back.
The loive grabbed it back. Yeah.
So you're saying
there's always kimlis. It's all kimlis. Whoever grabs, you can't doesn't lose. Yeah, and mitzin miyadei. Yeah. What are you going to do? I mean, the Alter Rebbe in Sif Dalet says that Lassis de Shemaim, you have to pay it back. Lassis de Shemaim clearly says you're not Yotze B'Dayanim, yeah?
So they can go back and forth the whole life, grab your free.
No, once you go to you grab it and you go to Bezdin and you assert your ownership, and then the next person that grabs doesn't work anymore. So all the grabbings only work until somebody puts his foot down and asserts ownership. Not Alter Rebbe Sif Dalet. What? Only if he took me down Saloiva. Rebbe's the Rabbanon. Okay, but here he says it seems like he says you're not mitzi from him. You can understand like that also. If he was toifas, the Rebbe's the Rabbanon. But here it's also you could say Kimli that it's not Rebbe's Bechlal. He says Kimli it's not Rebbe's Bechlal. I followed it on. Follow the Muki Yosef. It's mutter l'chatchila to take it. Or I follow my own understanding in the Taisvus. You don't like it, go to Bezdin, let me argue it out. But you can't grab it back. If it's a straight up Rebbe's the Rabbanon, it's different. I'm talking over here, it's a whole suffix. Now, when you have a loan of karka and you get back for it, karka, and then you get back ribis, which is money, which that is the shaila of the Geduli Trum over here, according to Taisvis. He says maybe we are moitzi from his hands. We are moitzi from him. Why? Because it's suffix fake. Two sfeikas. First of all, suffix maybe the whole heter of Taisvis doesn't apply. Suffix himself isn't a suffix of heter karkaris applies. And suffix, whether the heter of Taisvis apply, even if he said heter of Taisvis applies, does it apply also in when the halva was karka and the ribis was mammon? Yeah, so he puts it as a suffix. Now, there is the last paragraph. I'm going to jump now to the last paragraph of the Tzemach Tzedek that's relevant to what we're learning. And then we're going to go back to the third paragraph of Tzemach Tzedek. Again, it's on page 165 of our booklets. It's after this Aleph Beis Gimel, then the Zil Lashon Rashi Perek Naira. So it's two points I want to point out from here. So first he starts by saying Zil Lashon Rashi Perek Naira Schanim Bekar Kamal Rabbi Hudi quotes the whole Rashi. Okay, when the Meribis Gomar Kesef V'Yechel B'Yin the Havam Metaltnik the Kesef when Yeribis Edimel L'Maman Hu the Gomar Gzeira Shavul Mekarke. Yeah, Rashi when he discusses the Shaila of Rabbi Yirmiyah clearly says that it's Meribis. If Meribis Gomar Kesef V'Yechel B'Yin the Havam Metaltnik, right? So Mashma, the Tzemach Tzedek says Mashma. It clearly seems. The Rashi Svirale, the Ribis ain't a noyek elab metaltlin. Rashi holds clearly that Ribis only applies to metaltlin, not to karkos. HaTaisvus sham kosav v'loshen shema. The Taisvus in Ksubah says in the loshen of shema. V'zol l'shayne sham. Shezol l'shayne shema. Kahai gavna la Ribis b'karka. V'kach kosav v'Taisvus perikel nairis sevdu amaschel im. Perikel zeu neshech sevdu amaschel im. Then he quotes the Gedulei Truma, and he brings, towards the end, he says like this, towards the end of the Tzemach Tzedek. It's very interesting, because the Gedulei Truma brings it that maybe we're not Taifas B'dayonim. Yeah? There's the Lashon of the Gedulei Truma. Yeah, at the end of the Gedulei Truma, the Lashon of the Gedulei Truma was, Dilma milim biad malve dilma bavas karka v'ribis kesef ulay mafkinon mimalve. That's the words of the Gedulei Truma. Ulay mafkinon mimalve. Maybe we take it out of the malve's hands. But they have a sfex faker. There's interestingly look at the Tzemach Tzedek when he brings the Gedulei Truma. He says. Be'ikar adin kosaf, well, inyan hadin kevim misayif divrei Taisvus nira shem mesupakim, being that the Taisvus is in a suffix regarding the karka and pachon shabbat pruta, beheter lo shafkinon beheter. There's a suffix regarding the heter lo shafkinon vadei shel arashma b'nesfeikan bisura deraisa. Benaf kamine the im tofas loive mishel malve. If the loive took Malve ma'avur ribis shenotal mimenu emetzim miyod yamakim lekelabvos davaderaisa v'yoytze b'dayonim. Yeah, he says he brings it clear. He doesn't bring it bechlal as a suffix. He doesn't quote anything past that. He says clearly in such a scenario he doesn't bring it as a suffix. He brings it as a vadai, and he doesn't bring any svaris faket. There's a Gedulei Truma brings a whole explanation for it, and then yoytze b'dayonim because maybe it's deraisa, maybe it's rabbanan. Over here, the Tzemach Tzedek right away takes it that he could say Kimli that is Deraisa and it's Yetzer B'Dayan. It seems like it's a Tzedek will hold like the Tzeres. Now let's go jump up to the Ois Gimel in the Tzemach Tzedek. Vada Omar be'erchin. Yeah, that is regarding the end of the Taisvus. The Taisvus by us in the Gemara. Taisvus us in the Gemara ends with the Shaila of Erchin, that an Erchin, when you have the Bati Chayma, it's not considered. Why the Gemara says it's Ribis Deraisa, and Taisvus says, yeah, by that case, because the loan was money and the benefit was karka, so it's also. The Taisvus says the Tzemach says Kach Kosavaran, Chen Kosavaran B'Ksubas Sham. Yeah, the Ran also brings the raya from Erchin that if you give money and you receive karka as ribis, it's also. And the Gidul V'Gidul Truma Kosav the Yeshlemer Kmoiking Shalvo karka v'ribis kesef gam kain. That the Gidul Truma also holds that. That if the Gidul Truma says that just like that in a scenario when it's the opposite way, that the karka, the alvo was karka and the ribis is kesef, is also awesome. Letera be'inan shalvo v'ribis akol yeh karka. It means again, the Geduli Truma brings it as a suffix. Maybe. Tzemach Tzedek takes the Geduli Truma, makes it as a psak. Yeah, vadai from the Geduli Truma. To be able to have the heter of karka bekarka according to the Taisvus, there has to be hakol karka. If one of the sides is ribis, it's asur. That's how he understands the maskana of the Geduli Truma. Yeah. Now I brought to you. The reason I printed for you at the end of your book. There's a drush v'chidush from Rabbi Kiva Eger. Drush v'chidush is long. I don't have the time to go through it now. There's only 5 minutes left. But the idea of it is, he brings a interesting interesting svara. He says maybe even when it's karka bekarka, the extra karka should be yotze b'dayanim. Why? Because he looks at the essence of the transaction. So towards the middle of it, of the drush v'chidush. Just a second. Towards the middle, you will see it's about 12 or 13 lines into it. The line starts karka b'dinaim and says v'ula yeshleimar. The adin afim bekarka ein b'ribis deraisa afilu hochim mitzim. Yet the af be'avak ribis ein mitzim hainu dehechol be'atzmusa ein b'ribis gomo. Yeah. If the essence of the transaction doesn't have an element of ribis, but if the essence of the transaction does have an element of ribis, then we are moitzi. That's the first svara. Now when he concludes, he says no. He says be'etzim there's no ribis when it comes to karkos. Chachamim were machmir in it, not the other way around. We thought the first way he looks at it is that be'etzim there is ribis over here in karkos, but the Torah was materit. And towards the end, he says, "Abatzim there's no ribus in karkos." The Chachamim were machmer. So Chachamim were machmer. We're not yoytze b'dayanim. Now, regarding what's l'maisa, you can see in the beginning of Kuf Samach Aleph, there's a shardeya, there's a chavas das. The chavas das is very long. Shardeya is shorter. The shardeya holds that there's absolutely no ribus in karkos. The Chavas Das holds the maskana that there is ribis in karkos. What's the maskana l'maisa? From the Alter Rebbe, like I mentioned, the Alter Rebbe does not mention karkos. The Alter Rebbe in Sif Aleph only mentions Pachim Shabbat like the Tur brings in the name of the Rameh, and it does not mention karkos. And in Sif Daled, when he talks about, he says, yeah, there's a shayla of ribis mederabanon, even if it's b'derech mecher and not b'derech halva. But still does not mention whether there's ribis in karkos or not, and we could discuss it at length at a different time.